Privet Katila von Ningruski desu, and this is the weekly Russo-Ukrainian War weekly update for the week of October 9th through 15th of 2023. So in this week, we actually have a lot of interesting things to talk about. And the first thing we're actually going to talk about is we're going to start in the Donetsk direction, specifically in Avdiivka. The Russians have started their offensive operation in the Avdiivka area, and that is the main kind of event of this week that we'll talk about and discuss the events and what the purpose of it is and all that. So the purpose of this, the Russians have started a offensive operation here with an offensive going to the west from Krasnogorivka to this area, and from the south from Vodany and Opina towards Severina and Tonika and towards Avdiivka itself. So there's two areas of the offensive. Obviously, the purpose of this offensive is to encircle Avdiivka, meet up with these two offensive pushes from the north and down, and then from the south, and meet up in this village of Orlivka here. Now, so then, obviously once it's encircled, the Ukrainians that are stuck inside of the city will basically run out of ammunition, food, and when they can't get supplied, they'll have to basically give up. And so, is there any bigger purpose to this offensive? It seems kind of like, why are they focusing on this one city? Well, the reason is because this is part of the bigger operation to push the Ukrainians away from Donetsk city. As you can see, according to this map, these are the pre-war front lines. And as you can see, there's been very little changes on these front lines since the war started. And basically, the purpose of these operations in Avdiivka, in Mariinka, in Novomikhailivka, and all this, all the way down here, is that they're trying to push the Ukrainians back away from the Donetsk suburbs, back maybe like here or something, who knows, but back enough away where they cannot just indiscriminately shell Donetsk, because that is what's been happening. If anyone has been following the war, every day there's been some, in various intensities, various shellings of Donetsk, the Donetsk city itself. Sometimes, in various degrees of deadliness. And basically they are trying to push Ukrainian artillery away so that they can't just shell this indiscriminately with regular artillery. They have HIMAR missiles, and they have Storm Shadows that could strike this, obviously, even if they take all these cities on the border of Donetsk, the Donetsk suburbs. But those are way more expensive, and they can't just waste them on just random civilian targets. They have to be used for a specific military purpose, and basically they can't just use them for daily shelling as they are doing right now with their artillery. So the Avdiivka operation is one of the main axes, because this is one of the main areas where they're able to shell Donetsk, and they're hoping to capture this area so they could push the Ukrainian artillery back here and basically prevent them from being able to shell it. Now, how's the progress been looking like in Avdiivka for this week? Well, let's begin with the northern part, which is actually kind of the more interesting area. Now, this map doesn't actually show the extent of Russian advances. It's been very conservative in its gains. So I'm going to show the Rybar map here, which it shows a more accurate picture. So the first thing that we have to talk about is that while Russian positions were kind of around Krasnogorivka from the last time the Russians assaulted in Avdiivka, but they basically were kind of stuck in this area here. So the first thing, they launched a massive artillery and bombardment, as you can see, on Avdiivka, as the Rybar shows here. They've been using regular artillery, bombings with fab bombs. They've been using, drones. They've been using every single type of weapon that the Russians have to bomb this city. Basically, because this is actually one of the most fortified areas in Ukraine, basically. And the whole reason for that is because this is part of the pre-war front lines, and basically the Ukrainians have made this a fortified fortress, because this was what they thought the front line was going to be with the DPR separatists. So they made this a very fortified area. So this is this is not just some regular town. This is a very hard nut to crack. This is hence why the giant bombardment, trying to destroy the fortifications that have been built up over 8 years. Now, in the northern part, as we it doesn't show here, but I'll try to show the best I can. They advanced, and basically we have almost 100% confirmation that they have reached the rail line. That basically on the northern rail line and around this rail line, the Russians have established their positions. And because we, from geolocated footage, we have Russians basically operating here, or at least and even the Ukrainians showed videos of them trying to shell Russian positions in this area around the rail line. If you see my computer mouse, it go, this. So Russians have advanced from here and occupied more better defensive positions. And not only that, they've also advanced beyond this and are now on the outskirts of Berezhichi and Stepova. Now, they haven't taken them. In fact, they haven't taken but they are on the outskirts of these places. So they probably reached the rail line and then attacked across it, and now are like on these fields up here. And basically, the point is, and basically for like all this week, they've been trying to fight for Berezhichi and Stepova, and the Ukrainians keep trying to send reinforcements to Archecheny, and basically send them through like a hook to send them, down to these roads that lead up here to help shore up the defenses here. Now, we could see this in the Rybar map here. We could see them trying to take these villages here. Another thing about the northern part is that they also managed to occupy, they call this the Tetris, I think, or the waste heap, or the slag heaper. I forgot the exact name of it. But basically, this point right here is the highest point in this entire area. This is the highest point. So whoever controls this waste heap has eye control over this area, has the highest point, and obviously height is a very good advantage for any group trying to attack in Avdiivka. However, there's been some talks that the Ukrainians managed to or at least push the Russians back out of this heap. So this map has it in the gray zone, not under complete Ukrainian control, but not under complete Russian control as well. So they say this is part of a gray zone. So no one has complete control. So it's just a back and forth right now, fighting over this, and back and forth trying to fight for these villages. Because once they take this waste heap and once they take these villages, then the northern part is completely cut off, and they surrounded Avdiivka from the north. And they just have to go down and start attacking these villages here to cut off the last line of retreat. So obviously, the battles for this dominant height, is ongoing, and the battle for these villages to finally secure themselves in this area in the north is ongoing as well. We'll see how that occurs, but this is what's happening on the northern front. Obviously, it's the point of this is to capture these villages and keep going south. And then there's also the southern attack. So there's been attacks from the south as well. So the main so there's been one of the biggest attacks as well has been going from Vadania to Serina and Tonika. Right now they're trying to reach Serina itself, but the area between Vadana and Serina has multiple trench lines, multiple minefields. It's very heavily defended. A lot of times, with people who are not on the ground, right? It's very hard to say, like, hey, this looks like there's like two tree lines between, Vadan and Serina. It just looks like a giant. Why aren't the Russians just attacking? Like, why can't they just capture this? Because we don't actually see the main fortifications here, how strong the minefields and fortifications are. So the Russians did occupy, a few tree lines, a few strong points here. In fact, there was some geolocated footage of them even being in this area. However, they haven't reached the village or managed to actually enter the village yet. But obviously, the point is to try to reach this village and take this village as well. And probably also just attack this way, because then if they take Serina, they don't really need they could just go up, because the main purpose of this is to take out this this main line of communication in this area. Now, so they're trying to take these, because then the same kind of reason why they're trying to advance in this area too, because if they take this, they could just move down and try to take, cut off the Avdiivka from the, take out this line, and then also they're trying to advance here, put pressure on both flanks, and meet up in the middle. So that's basically been the attack so far. There's also been attacks in kind of this area in this very complicated area. Basically, they've been there was an advance that went from the Russian kind of the pre-2014 or pre-war front lines, and the Russians basically broke through the first line of Ukrainian defenses and managed to occupy a intersection of rail lines here, right here. They also so they've been trying to basically reach this rail line right here in front of this kind of little foresty area that separates the main residential areas from Avdiivka. Now, this place is heavily fortified as well. This is like, another heavily fortified area. So the manage to take a bunch of these checkpoints here is very important. If anything, this is just to put pressure on this area. They've also been attacks on the quarry in the south. I have this load in this area right here. As we mentioned a few weeks ago, there's been an attack on Opina. So we could see the Ukrainians are obviously to the north of Opina. But it doesn't really matter because they just need to advance here. So they just need to hold on to this position and prevent the Ukrainians from attacking the side of this growing salient towards Syria. So that's been kind of the Avdiivka operation so far. That's basically been the progress, and as we can see here, we could see them getting close. So they're trying to take these villages. They've been trying to put pressure on the flanks here. And obviously, the Ukrainians have been sent massive reinforcements. The Russians have been shelling this heavily. And, originally I thought this was it looked like it was going very quick, at least on the first day of the operation. But as the weeks went on, as the days went on, I should say, it started looking like they've kind of tried to consolidate like their positions, on this new, along the tree lines in these areas here, and the Ukrainians have been doing some local counterattacks. For example, that one counterattack that pushed the Russians off this height. The Ukrainians aren't on it, but obviously that was a Ukrainian counterattack. The Ukrainians are trying to stop this operation, obviously. So that's basically been the operation so far, and the Russians kind of like slowed down a bit to help have the Ukrainians try to throw their punches, and before they restart operations again. So they're still shelling, they're still trying to do attacks, but it might take a month or two for them to fully encircle Avdiivka. So I don't think this is going to end very time soon. I could be wrong, but I expect basically this entire area it might take a month or two if the Russians are successful and are managed to push the Ukrainians back. So, so this is going to take a while. It's going to be part of our videos probably for a while unless it peters out, but I don't think it will. Unless this part, they actually don't really intend to take Avdiivka, they actually just wanted to bring more Ukrainian reserves here, which could be possible, but who knows. But that's been Avdiivka. That's basically the main show of this episode so far. Again, this is the point of this is to push the Ukrainians away from Donetsk. There's been pushes in Marinka, for example. There's been local attacks of the Russians been able to kind of occupy this area right here, and they basically almost took fully the Marinka of in this area. Again, they're trying to get these areas, these tree lines, so they could get to the side of Krasnogorivka. So when they try to push the Ukrainians out of this city, it's going to be a lot easier if they're able to attack from the side here. So that's they've been advancing here. They've been advancing even more to the south in a village called Nova Mikhailovka. Let me show you right here. In fact, they've been advancing in the south. So there's been some advances here this week. They've been taking some strong points, some tree lines, some trenches, getting closer and closer to Nova Mikhailovka. This village has been shelled almost daily. There's also this strong point that's right here. You could kind of even see it on the map. And so the Russians have been bombing this as well. And so basically they're trying to push the Ukrainians away from Nova Mikhailovka, this area right here, and push them back, here. And this also would also have the benefit of complicating Ukrainian defenses in Ugledar. Obviously the Russians have been trying to push, there was the pesky operation that we saw in the summer of 2022, We saw the Avdiivka operation that broke through here in the spring summer of 2022, and then like kind of when they occupied this areas right here in earlier this year in the spring, I believe. So now I think they're trying to finish this operation. And a lot of the troops who are fighting here are DPR troops, and they really want to see their city not be shelled daily. So they have a big interest in trying to see this succeed. So that's the Donetsk front. Let's move also to another place of Russian offensive, the Oskol front or the Luhansk front. As I mentioned last week, this is what I call the massage offensive because this is putting different pressure points along the front for a bigger payoff in the future. Putin has said that the Russians are in what he calls active defense mode, meaning that they're not actively trying to break through, but actively trying to improve their positions for what I'm guessing is a Russian offensive in the winter. Because, the thing is the weather doesn't make sense, right? If the Russians attack now, this is the worst weather, like, kind of they could attack in. It's, like, rainy. It's not good. In the winter, the ground will harden and freeze, and it'll be easier to do offensive operations. But, however, that doesn't mean, like, the weather just cancels all operations, right? You could still do local attacks. It doesn't stop all, but like massive attacks along the entire front, trying to take lots of ground. That might complicate if the ground's muddy. Now, I also think any sort of offensive is going to be like Avdiivka, like kind of like what we saw in Bakhmut in spring of 2023, what we saw in Luhansk when they took Severodonetsk and Lysychansk back in the spring and summer of 2022. It's going to be slow grinding. It's going to be slow trying to basically shell an area until the position can be stormed, and then take enough areas where the Ukrainian defenses are surrounded or almost surrounded, and it'll be forced to get pushed away. But however, right now they're doing a massage offensive to kind of get a better outcome in the future. The first thing we want to talk about is Makivka. They've been advancing here very slowly. They've occupied some tree lines, some tree lines here, as you can see, some trench lines. This area, again, the Luhansk front has been kind of static for the last year almost a year. And so this has basically been they've been able to build up defenses here. And, so this area of Makivka is very heavily defended. It's going to be very hard for them to break through. And the Russians have been able to get closer to here, but they haven't taken the village yet. You might be wondering what the purpose of this is. If they could take Makivka, they could then attack Nevsky, and kind of go down here, because the Ukrainians haven't really thought about if they got attacked from the behind or from the north. They've been thinking of getting attacked from the side, right? So it's better to attack in two directions. Now, but also taking Makivka will mean they'll also have another area to break through what they call the Zhir-Bets River, which kind of goes up here. And it's like one of the main defense lines for the Ukraine before they reach the Oskol, which is kind of Russians' big goal in this offensive operation here. There's been some mutual shelling in this area in the Liman front, but no major changes on the front here, though. There's been some Russian attacks in the Novy Yegorovka front. They've been fighting over these villages in Nadia in this area here, and the Ukrainians managed to send troops and stabilize this situation. So the Russians have been able to, but there have been some mutual small-scale attacks trying to take these villages so far, but with no success for this week so far. There's also been attacks in the northern sector of this Oskol front in Sinkovka. They've basically there's some rumors saying that Sinkovka is in the gray zone, that they occupied kind of the first, like kind of the top of the village, and that the bottom is controlled by Ukrainians. They've said that before, so we need some confirmation. We also know that this area is kind of a little bit in the fog of war. We know that the Russians control Liman Pervy, but these forest area is like kind of like the front line between the Ukrainians and Russians is very blurry in this area, in this forest. And so the Sinkovka is obviously also defended. The Russians managed to push out of Lusona here, took some positions here about a month or two ago, and they've basically been able to now push positions to start shelling Petropavlovka here, which is kind of the first Ukrainian defense village for Kupinsk. So obviously, these offensive operations here is to start cracking the Kupinsk city defense. There has not been as much changes here. There's just been some little bit of grinding around this area here, but the exact, it's small scale that it's very, it's very hard to say where exactly, what parts of this forest have been taken and such. But there's been some movement, but not enough to fundamentally change the situation. There's also been attacks here in the Klishlovka front. They've said the Russians been able to advance closer here. They reached the outskirts of Ivanivka. We mentioned this before. They're trying to storm the areas around Ivanivka. They've been trying to manage to break through to Kotlarovka here and basically collapse the main Ukrainian defense line of Klishlovka, because if they can collapse this area, there's nothing stopping them from reaching, the southern part of the Kupinsk defense line. Obviously, this is trying to get to the north, and then kind of the hope is then to link up this area and kind of cut off Kupinsk and start the siege of Kupinsk. It's going to be kind of hard because Kupinsk can still be supplied from behind the Osko River, but it'll start kind of putting the pressure on it, and that's kind of the point. So the Massage offensive is still going on. There's not been a major breakthrough, or at least even a big enough thing to show on the map. There's been some back and forth, probably taking a tree line, a trench network, a strong point in this area right here specifically, and sometimes in the middle here. But it's kind of not enough to fundamentally change the battlefield. Not really worth really. It's kind of hard to discuss exactly what they took. But nothing that fundamentally changes the battle space. Unlike what we saw in Avdiivka, for example, which, in the grand scheme of things, it's small, but you actually could kind of talk about the changes on the battlefield on the map. So that's that. No changes in Siversk. A little bit on the Bakhmut front. There's no big changes here for this week. But there's been some fighting on the northern sector. The Russians have been trying to improve their positions in the northern part of Bakhmut, trying to basically improve their positions around the Bakhmut reservoir here. Or maybe it's called the Bervkivka Reservoir. I can't. But this reservoir here, they're trying to improve their positions here. They've been improving their positions near Oreka Vasilivka, in northern near Visola, up here. So they've been not too big of progress, but there's been kind of slowly creeping, trying to improve their defenses to the north. So the Russians have been good in the northern defense. As we know, we talked this a lot, but the Ukrainians have been advancing in the southern part of Bakhmut. They took in Klishevka and Andriivka a little while ago, and now the Russians put themselves along the rail line. And basically for this week, and as has been the case for like almost a month now, there's been mutual attacks from Andriivka and Klishevka to trying to break through the Russian defense line in this rail line. But the Ukrainians have not been able to penetrate this area just yet. So there's been attacks here. They've been trying to occupy points along the rail line here. Trying to attack and occupy this area, trying to attack to the north and occupy this area. But the Russians are holding their defense line, so we'll see if they could continue to hold in the coming weeks. But this week, no major changes on this front. The Ukrainians are trying to break through the new Russian defense line along the rail line in the southern edge of Bakhmut, and the Russians are defending themselves better on the northern part, getting some better positions here, but by a little bit. We're now going to move. There hasn't been really any advances in the South Donetsk direction. The Russians have been advancing a bit in Prinutina. They've advanced to the north to try to secure better gains here, and it looks like the Russians have been heavily sharing Urozhaina. They've been really they might actually be preparing an offensive operation maybe to take these two villages back. Because, again, the Ukrainians took these two villages after long fighting, and now they've been trying to take the flanks. Because, this is kind of a little bit of a bad position because, and all that. But it makes more sense that the Russians take it, because then it makes Russia have a very clean, more better defense line. Russians don't really need to take these villages. It'd probably be better if they take these two villages and create a better defense line here. That might be what they're doing. Maybe they're just to pin down Ukrainian troops here, but this front's basically been kind of quiet, except maybe some movements to the north of Prinutia, which the Russians took basically a lot, advanced along this canyon. And these ditches here, so these areas here, they've been advancing here, try to improve their positions in this area. Now, but there are no major advances. The Ukrainians completely stopped attacking here, and the Russians are now improving their positions here. The same thing was actually happening in the former area, which we would always talk about in the Robotyne front, the Zaporozhye front. This is where the Ukrainians did their main attack, and as I mentioned last week, this was the end of the Ukrainian offensive. But that doesn't mean that fighting in this front, in the Zaporozhye front, has completely ended. There's still fights going on, including this week. This leads to us to, what exactly? So they're not trying to break through to the Sea of Azov. They're not trying to break through to Tokmak, but they are trying to. The Russians and the Ukrainians both have different purposes. So the Ukrainians are trying to make this salient more secure. They are trying to improve attack on the flanks. That's what they were trying to do in Verba. And this week they actually try to advance in Kopany. In fact, they've been some advanced. They took a trench line in the north of Kopany, and they've been trying to attack from the west of Robotyne, trying to put the squeeze on Kopany. If they could take Nesterklanka and Kopany, they could basically secure their western flank, and that actually helps them a lot with Robotyne being their salient thing to help secure their salient. They stopped attacking in Verbova, but they've been trying to attack near Novoproprovka, trying to improve their positions between Verbova and Robotyne, but there's been no advances here of major significance here. There's been some back and forth between these two villages of Novoproprovka and Robotyne, but so far no major changes. However, the Russians have advanced from Verbova, and they actually managed to advance and take some tree lines and trench lines, in front of the village. The Ukrainians managed to get almost as close as possible to the village, but never managed to enter it. And so the Russians did some counterattacks and managed to occupy some more positions to push the Ukrainians back into the fields. So that's the position in Verbova. So the Russians are trying to liquidate the salient and push the Ukrainians back to Orekov, back where they started. And the Ukrainians are trying to protect that salient by taking Kopany and secure their flanks. There's been some small changes, capturing a trench line or a tree line, but no major big changes yet. So we could see them using their their goals of the Russians and Ukrainians are trying to achieve their goals, as I mentioned, in this area. So we'll see who could be successful. But so far in this area, there's going to be no more big, massive tank battles or massive armored assaults, if that makes sense. The Russians also advanced here a little bit. They managed to occupy, a tree line here near Pitikavki, trying to improve their positions near Zhirbankia, and try to basically improve their positions in this area as well. There was a little bit of an advance here this week as well that I have to mention. In the Kherson front, there hasn't been any major changes. However, the Ukrainians are still going to do an offensive operation here. The Ukrainians started to shell all along the Kherson Oblast in the rear of Russian troops here. They've been sending more Ukrainian special forces and troops to the islands near this area here, and so forth, and these areas here. So they've been trying to land on these islands and put more troops there, put more supplies near Dacha. The Russians are responding with fab bombs, with shelling, but so far with no. They haven't been able to push the Ukrainians out of the islands. They also redeployed their marine units here, and they've been refitting them after the battles in the South Donetsk direction. So once they're refitted, they're going to be the main offensive force to try to break through and across the Dnieper. Will they be successful? We don't know. But while there's been no changes on the front to talk about, we have to mention that the Ukrainians are preparing an offensive operation here and doing some pre-made, kind of setting it up so they could do it. I think I talked about before, this could just be a pinning operation to distract the Russians so they could maybe restart operations here. They want to pull Russian troops away from here to here. Or they might just think, hey, let's throw a Hail Mary and try to break through and cut off the land bridge in this direction, and maybe they're successful, who knows, but that's basically what their plan is. So that's what's happening in Kherson. So there's been a lot going on this week. Obviously, the main attraction has been Avdiivka, and that's probably going to be the main focus of our in the next few weeks, probably. But there's also been attack. The Russians are now on the offensive on most of the entire front. The Ukrainians are still counterattacking and trying to improve their positions in Zaporozhye. They've also been preparing an offensive in Kherson, but the Russians are now on the attack, and they're doing their small-scale little active defense. So nothing too crazy at the moment, but we're now in another section of the war. So that's been the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like this video if you want to see more videos like this, and subscribe to my channel as well. And if you want, share this video if you want as well. So aim high, wander on, from America with Russian love.